How's everybody doing today? This is Pete from Spawn Fly Fish, and today I'd like to show you one of my favorite variations on a Copper John. I kind of call this bug the Overkill because it takes a Copper John, and imagine if it was on human growth hormones or steroids, this would be the end result. So in the hook, I've got the Daiichi 1120 in a size 10, and for the bead, I've got a 1/8 inch black bead. And so right now I'm going to just start some non-lead wraps. This is the 0.015 size. And I want about 10, 9, 8 wraps, somewhere in there. This is just to solidify the bead, keep it from moving around. And I'm going to round the cut end, and then I'll cut the back, and we will round that end. And the reason we do that is so we don't have to replace our thread right away as we begin to wrap that down. And for the thread, I've got some Veevus here, black, and this is the 12/0. And I know it seems like somewhat small for a size 10 hook. It is somewhat small, but there are a lot of components that we're going to be putting on this. So a little bit smaller thread is fine because we'll utilize that extra room. And once you've got a few wraps up and down, all those wire wraps, and we're going to come back down to the hook bend. And what I'm looking for here is I would like you to imagine a line from the hook eye straight back, and that's kind of that line is where we're looking for the tails, because we can very easily go too far for these tails, and what will happen is when you put the fly in your box and all that, the biot tails are going to get caught at the bottom. So I like this right here, and what I'm going to do before I get the biots is I'm going to add 1 and 2 wraps of thread right at the end. Now that little bump, when we tie in our biots, will keep them going opposite directions of each other, and it will keep them from coming together and making one single tail look. And if that does happen and you have trouble tying these biots in for a tail, don't worry about it, because the illusion at that point becomes a shuck that is being kicked off as a bug would hatch or pupate, and then that triggers a fish as well. As far as the length here, I'm going in between 1/3 and 1/2 body length. So I'm going to just tilt this toward me a little bit and get that first leg tied in. And you'll see we're trying to maintain roughly a 45-degree angle off the end of the hook. And if you see when I tie it in, so there's the angle, but I'm coming at this angle and then I'm tying the actual biot down on the side of the hook. And this is another way to make sure that that biot will never come in line with the hook. It's always going to stay at an angle. And then for the second biot, and by the way, we're using some gold Goose biots here, we're just going to repeat that in the opposite angle. And again, that bump, once we tie back down to it, is like a little insurance policy on these things. I'm just going to get this thread over and then make sure I have that positioned and that the length is the same as the other. So now you can see there's the angle, but as I tie this down, I'm going to the opposite side of the hook shank and on the side. That is what we want. And then I'm going to trim these biots so that they end just before our weighted wire. And I'll finish tying down. And so now look at these tails. You can see when this fly is inserted into a fly box, now I can't damage the tails because they stick down too far. Something to keep in mind. It's an easy thing to make those tails just a little bit too long. All right, so good so far. And now let's go to our wires. So for this fly, I'm going to use 3 wires. They're all size small, and we have gold wire, copper brown wire, and black. And you obviously don't have to use 3 different colors. You can use whatever colors catch fish in the waters you fish. However, I will tell you that there's something about this color combo that the fish really do get excited over, and I think part of it is the look of a small stonefly or something like that, but in general it's just a very buggy. So you can see I've got all 3 wires here. Now wherever I start them, meaning if the gold's in the middle as I start, or if the copper brown is in the middle, then that's what has to be maintained, is the position you begin them all the way through. A couple light wraps just to make sure everything is staying there. And I'm going to turn it toward you so you can see the importance of maintaining just a little tension and keeping all the wires together as you wrap them down. And then there's one more little trick here. And once I've got my thread all the way back to our last thread wraps where we finish the tails, I'm going to bring the wires up so that you'll see here almost at a 90-degree angle to the body. And now I'm going to finish wrapping my thread back up, securing all those wires down again, getting a little bit more coverage on those non-lead wire wraps, and now I'm ready. So the reason we bring those wires up before we start is that it will create just a small crimp that as we begin to wrap these wires, there's no slippage. And if you've tied wire body flies enough, you'll know that can be very frustrating. So now I'm just going to turn this for a second, but I would like you to watch. I'm not going to go rotary here on you. I'm going to do this by hand so you can watch as these wraps. The key here is keeping constant tension, not overly stressed, not relaxed. It's somewhere in the middle. And if you can maintain that pressure on these wires as you go, they'll stay together a little bit easier in your hands. And then as you wrap, of course, they're going to just hug each other a little bit. As if you look at some wire body flies, you know, it's pretty easy to go, oop, that person knows what they're doing, and maybe this person could use some practice, but not the simplest thing in the world, but after you've done a few, it'll get easier. So right there, you can see I've got a little less than perfect on that, but all right. So now I'm going to tie this off at just a slight angle. Got 3 good thread wraps there. And then I'm going to pull the wires back. I'm just going to crimp it with my fingernail. And now they're going to stay where I want them. So I'll give them a cut. And you see the butt ends here all are kind of going back. And you do what you like to do, but I'll tell you this is much stronger to finish it this way because now this wire is trapped twice. So it would really take some sharp teeth and all that to move those around. And that's what we want. We want the strongest possible fly we can produce. So next step, we've got some holographic gold saltwater Flashabou, just a little wider, and we're going to put a little wing case on here, and this will be the flash of the wing case. So just line it up with the top so that it matches the eye, and run that back just a few wraps. As far as our proportions here, for the body, it's not going to be quite a full 2/3 for the abdomen, but just keep that in mind, roughly 1/3 thorax, 2/3 for the abdomen. Our next element or material is going to be some gator skin, thin skin, and this is black clear. And as far as how I decide how wide to go on this, it's just slightly wider than the 1/8 bead, 1/8 inch bead, excuse me. Got a little too crazy there. And so as I tie this down, when I bring it over and then bring the flash over, this thin skin would be slightly wider than my flash, but just barely. All right, so now we've got the wing case tied in, nothing crazy, but I do like to add a couple more biots here as an impression of a leg, and especially if you look at like a stonefly pattern or something like that, you don't necessarily have to be, give them a realistic fly that has the exact number of legs and everything. We're just going for the impression here. So on these, I'm going to tie them with the concave or bottom side facing outward. And so the convex or top side is going to be tied against the hook shank here. And what I'm going for is something where in this gap for the thorax, we're going right in the middle of that for our thread wraps. And as far as a measurement on these legs, I'm going just to the end of the body at a slight angle, and I do mean slight. Otherwise, you'll slip that under and lose it underneath the hook and have no visibility. So you can see there, we've got them positioned where we want, and don't worry about flaring them out, getting them to pop up. We'll handle that here in a second. So get a few more wraps, make sure those butt ends are tied down before you cut them out. And like so. And then if there's a difficulty factor, this would be it. So here we have CDC feather and wood duck, gold. And so as you see, I trimmed out the tip of it. So I have a nice little tie-in space. And I'm going to tie that in on my side and go right over that first Biot leg that I tied in here. And gentle wraps to start, just because we want to position. We don't want to snap that quill off, and it will break on you. Make sure you don't wrap so far back that you tie that leg down any more than it is. I know this is a lot going on here, but if you guys can keep up with this much, we are almost finished. All right, so now all we need to do is fill in that abdomen, or excuse me, thorax. And for that, like I like to do with dry flies, streamers, nymphs, you name it, boom, we've got some spawn semi-seal. This is the Sculpin or sand dab. And so for this, we do not need a lot. We're just going to get a nice, even, thin dubbing noodle. And if you like to wax your thread, now would be the time. I think we can make that work. So we're looking 2.5 inches roughly of dubbed noodle. So get that snugged up to the hook shank there, and see if we can wrap this and keep everything where it needs to be. So that first wrap, right, we're just over where we finished all of our goodies and tied in that feather. Now here's where it can get a little tricky, and this is where bodkin point comes in handy. I'm going to lift the leg on my side. Well, let's do one more wrap in front of that one and that one. And now let's go behind these legs. So bodkin moves that leg. I'm going to pretend like I can see from here, and now we're going to get behind that side. And there we go. So now one more wrap behind, and we'll get in front, and this is going to, of course, keep the positioning of our legs exactly where we want it. So make sure it's positioned where it makes you happy before we finish dubbing up front. And now we are all the way up behind the bead again. All right, so now with this feather, we're going to use our offhand and kind of coax these fibers back toward the hook bend. And it might take a few times. I should say it will take a few times. Once you've got them to where they'll hold a little bit, you can get it started. And here's one. At this point, I'm going to take another thread wrap just to make sure I'm on the outer edge of this feather so I don't have any issues tying off. Again, grab all those fibers, push them back, and that's about all the fibers we really need. We're not going, for a bushy dry fly here. This is just to add some lifelike movement of a bug that would be hatching and is trying to swim through the water and all that good stuff. So why CDC on this? The natural barbules off of the fibers on this CDC, if you look, you can see all those little barbules on there. And what will happen under the water is those will grab little bubbles of air. And so, fish are keen on watching bugs and noticing that, oh, there's a lot of air around that bug. It must be struggling or hatching, and they know it's a little bit easier to get at. All right. So just part the top of those fibers and bring that thin skin over so that it's going to line up on top of the bead and in line with the hook eye. A couple gentle wraps over to position. Make sure it's riding on top over that hook eye, and if it is, now we'll bring the flash over. Same thing, keep an eye on positioning, and if it's in the center, give it a little bit more pressure on the second wrap, and then one more for good measure. Now, we're not going to cut this right away. We're going to bring this flash back, and now grab that little tag end that sits there and get a couple good thread wraps on that. And now, much like we did with the wire and doubled it down, we're doubling down our flash too, so that it cannot just simply boop, pull out when that first fish hits. And we'll solidify it with some resin here in a minute, but good tip if you're doing flash like that for a wing case, fold it back over itself. Never have to worry about it. A little bit of a cute cut here and get that thin skin out. And we are ready for a little tidying up of our thorax and head. And now let's go ahead and toss a whip finish in there. Here we go. Moving those thread wraps forward each wrap. First thread wrap, let's do one more. There we go. Let's get rid of that thread. Be careful not to trim out any of those CDC fibers. All right, so now I'm just gonna put a kiss of some Loon hardhead clear on there. Get those thread wraps secured, especially on the bottom side where you have that knot, because we will be coming through with resin on top of the wing case. But for that bottom side, make sure you've got that knot covered with a little bit of cement of one form or another. All right, and you can see some of these fibers from the CDC are long, and you can get in there and just kind of pinch them with your fingertips and trim it that way. Make whatever look is aesthetically pleasing to you, but keep in mind what's aesthetically pleasing to the fish is more important. Now, so we've got some thin UV clear, and I mean, I'm going to use just a small amount on top of this. And I just want to cover that wing case and make it connect so it's touching just the top of the wire that's behind it. Even if you were using like an epoxy or something like that, you know, you could coat the whole deal on top. So we'll just copy that like so. And I'm going to hit it here with the UV torch. And that is about all you will need for the Overkill or variant on a Copper John. I do want to trim these just a touch, and there we go. That's about as buggy as it gets, in my opinion. Rainbow trout, brown trout, cutthroat trout, pretty much anything that's in the water and needs a snack is going to say, yep, that looks pretty yummy. So I hope you guys tie this up. A little bit challenging for a small nymph, but again, if even one or two of these techniques can be applied to your other dressings, then it was worth checking out. We really do appreciate the time you guys spend watching these videos, and we'll continue to crank out content. So please leave us comments and let us know what you'd like to see next. If you did enjoy, please remember to hit like and subscribe, and we will see you guys on the water.